Welcome ASLers to another jam session. Was going to turn into a replay, but we decided to go ahead and change it up into looking at your scenario card, reading your victory conditions, and adjustments you can make during your game to make you a better ASL player. I hope you enjoy. I want to first start by just everyone introducing themselves. Obviously their names are here, and just kind of like give your experience as an ASL player. And that way everyone kind of knows what we're dealing with and what I'm dealing with in terms of experience. I know some of you already, but just to let the other guys know who's what. If you don't want to add, if you don't want to comment, I have no problem with that. No big deal with me. But if you're willing to share that information, please share, and then we'll start. That way we can kind of, if everyone's fairly experienced, then we can just forego some of the, say, common aspects of ASL and get into something either a more detailed or just something else that you guys might want to cover. That's kind of what we're looking at. So let me drop that. So go ahead, David. If you choose, David, you can go ahead and go first.
Hey folks, I'm relatively new to Squad Leader Starter Kit. I think I picked up the first kit a few years ago, but and have since picked up all of starter kits in the expansion. Certainly gone through the rules and played a few games, but I generally only play once or twice a year, and so the skills get rusty very quickly. So these opportunities are great to kind of refresh my memory and try and keep up with some of the concepts of Squad Leader. Thanks.
Hi, my name's Mark. I'm from England. I bought the game secondhand from a friend who was generally into war games about 10 years ago, and me and a friend tried to go through the rules, and we did a few basic scenarios, got up to the point where we were using AFEs, and then I stopped, and I recently discovered VASL. And now I'm just trying to get back into it. So I'm interested in watching some more experienced players play in the game and to pick up what I can. And that's me.
Hello.
Really.
Hello, everybody. My name's Bob. I guess you'd say I'm at SK1 level. I'm pretty well new. I'm wanting to learn so I can, especially with Vassal, so I can get online and start playing.
All right, good deal. Thanks for your introductions. Yeah, I'm kind of eating lunch at the same time, so it gives me some time. So let me, since we have actually a very diverse array of players from. Someone's actually gone through SK3 with AFBs, and then we've got Robert, who's just starting out, and then David, who's played it a little bit before and kind of wants to get a little bit more information. So that's great. So everyone's got a little bit. The knowledge base is different on all levels, so that's kind of good. But this might be something easier for you, Finney or Mark. Or is it Mark Finney, right? Mark.
Yeah, it's Mark. Yeah.
Okay. Can I call you Finney because that's what your name says? Whatever you want to.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Just because I don't know, I can change it to Mark, but as Finney pointed out, what I like to, if I'm just gonna preview like a couple of the scenarios, and what we're gonna do is this doesn't have the scenario victory conditions on this one here, so. Just in terms of setup, you guys obviously war gamers, things like that, but in ASL SK, let me pop up. Yeah, I'll just start with this one, and then we'll go to the retaking Veerville, and we can discuss that. And you'll see a lot of differences between these two particular scenarios, and I can go over slightly variations. And then after that, it might pop some topics into your guys' heads, and then we can step on those. My opponent that we were scheduling to play SK4 today, he got his times mixed up, or I got my times mixed up. It didn't work out. He's a newer player, like some of you guys. He's Brian. I played him in Kawaguchi's Gamble in one of my replays. Great guy. Looking forward to playing the next scenario, which is essentially Kawaguchi's Gamble Part 2. It's the Raiders kind of on the attack versus the Japanese. So anyway, if you can see this through the link here through on Vassal, we were touching on this on the last jam session. I was talking about a setup that I particularly had, and this is what you want to do initially when you're reading a scenario. Is you don't necessarily want to just focus on your units, and everyone usually thinks about killing things and how many guys do I need to kill. And I was thinking about the scenario because I'd played a couple times before, and I'd come up with a different type of strategy or a different setup, and just as Mark pointed out, a different Mark pointed out in the last jam session that, you know, the issues that we're having here, and this is what you need to look at when you're looking at a scenario, especially when they give you kind of like a wonky setup. Obviously, the blue line is where the Germans can set up, and the Americans set up down in the green area. So Americans will be coming on down here. He'll have his stacks, and he'll have his kill stacks, and the whole 9 yards. And he'll probably have a leader over here. I should put a leader over here. And let's say another squad or something. And these other guys are just on the board. This doesn't really matter too much. So you've got your setup. So in just determining when you're looking at the board, when you're getting the counters out, as you're sitting down as the Americans, as you're sitting down as the Germans, you say, what does the other guy need to do to win the game? In this particular scenario, I think there are 25 building locations. Mind you, building locations versus buildings. I think it's building locations in this one. It's not, I'm not sure why it's not on this pre-made set, but anyway. Building, I think it's building locations because I got that confused when we were playing. So, to control a building, you simply have to take a unit. If none of the enemies are in there, as soon as you enter the building, then you control the entire building. If no enemies are, no good order, I think no good order enemies are present. So that instance, if this unit and single man counters cannot control buildings, they can only deny, which is a big difference. You want to make sure you know that difference at the end, but it's not the point of the scenario. So essentially, in 2 hex moves, he gets to control 6 buildings. So if the Americans counter exhaust fast and just kind of bypasses people and things like that, then he can get to a big chunk, and you can count out however you want. You can cut up this board, left side, right side. Let me get the Epic Pen going, and you can see, you know, the Americans can essentially choose one side or the other to really kind of to go for his objectives, which is very versatile for him. And so what we're looking at is he has got to get all these buildings, or like a third or half of these buildings, on the top board. So obviously he's got to spend a turn or two moving up here, getting in position. And I think the standard German move is putting some dudes in here, slowing them up. You know, all we want to do is really slow them up. And then we've got like some fortified buildings. We're not going to worry about the fortified buildings right now. So pretty much there's a lot of open ground that you see, and then there's the buildings in the center. Now, for the Americans to make it easier for him to get across, they have excellent smoke making capabilities, as you need to determine in your OB by looking at the OB, not just yours, but what they have. Again, what your enemy has and what they have to deal with. Flamethrower number 1 should be a big kicker to you when you guys look at that. Say, flamethrower, he's going to use that to melt everything in the buildings. And so you really don't want to face this thing face to face. So if you see this, you need to knock that unit out at a range that is safe for you. You don't want him to get into range and then you have to take him on. Like these guys here, especially since that's a stone building, and if he happens to have a 9-2 leader with, let's say, that particular unit that's using it, then if you have a morale check, essentially this unit will have an 8 morale based on the leader's modifier on him, assuming the leader passes the morale check. So anyway, that's going to cause you a world of hurt. These units, let me zoom in. These units right here are going to cause you a world of hurt. You know, especially if you have some sort of defense like this. So he's going to punch a hole through the line, go for it. So what I thought about the Germans is you need to slow them down. And just like Mark pointed out, when the Americans reach here, like on turn 1 or turn 2, which they will, and you really can't do much about that, the Germans now are at a disadvantage. And the Germans in this game, you essentially kind of want to stay on the defensive advantage in this game. And this particular setup will put you at a grave disadvantage. You're firing at 2+1 the build against him. He's firing 6+3. He has more firepower to come to bear than you have on vice versa, even though he only has a +1 modifier. Now, in my opinion, this is a poor setup. Let's reverse it. Let's say the Germans were attacking and the Americans are up here. So taking advantage, in this case, you're taking advantage of the Americans' range. At this point, you could probably just stack both of you. And if the Germans should happen to come through this particular direction, now the Americans have almost a double, like a ×2 advantage. The Germans have crap terrain, crap morale, and crap range. And right here, it's a done deal. This is American win no matter what way you look at it. It's just that the Americans will just win this sort of setup. So again, taking your pieces and analyzing what they can do for you. 4-3-6s in stone buildings, once they break, crap morale, it's going to take them a turn and a half to rally, right? So essentially they're one and done. Those types of units are one and done. And so in that instance, I say, how can I use my 4-3-6s to be effective in my game? Now, the 7 morale units over here on the right-hand side, they're 7 morale. They're not too bad. 4 range, it's okay. This is the best of your bunch. What I did, and I tried it out, is since they're crap units, I stacked my units because this is in my, and I think I put my leader like here or something like that, or with one of these units. I think I put them back here. I think I had 4 of my squads set up right in his face. And you say, Stu, you've got no terrain, no defensive terrain to look at. You're in the open. You're going to be demolished. You're right. But what do I have? Anybody? What do I have that the enemy doesn't have when he's approaching me? What do I have as a defender? And
blank fire.
Point blank fire. And even before that, Vinny, specifically, what do I have in terms of timing? In terms of timing, what do I have?
Defensive fire.
Right.
Phase.
I've got first shot on him, right? I've got first shot on these bastards. And what does my first shot give me? Let's just assume he assault moves there. Let's assume he wastes a movement phase here, and then he assault moves there, so he gets full modifiers. What does that give me for my units? It gives me point blank fire, as you said. And so, because I have an array of units up here, sure, he could flank one side or the other, but pretty much any location in this woods that he goes to, if he likes to go to, if he goes to the flank, that's fine, because now he's in the open, right? We're even better. Even if it's lower chart, we don't really care. But even if he does a wide breadth assault like this, and he's got his leader in the back, let's say he takes 5 units. It really doesn't matter. What are we looking at here? Let me get rid of this real quick. Just a second. Okay, there we go. Got rid of all that crap. So at this setup, and let's say he moves 1 unit. Let's say he is, hell, let's just say worst case scenario, he advances everyone. Worst case, I don't even have defensive fire on him, right? Worst case scenario for the Germans is he advances everyone. Obviously, the best case scenario, he just moves 2 in there with non-assault movement. We pop them at 8 even, right? But worst case scenario, we're looking at 8 + 1. Would everyone agree with that? It's simple 1-to-1 of shots here, and let's say this guy over here is going to be free. We're gonna give him a free shot. right? So we're looking at 8+1 straight across the board. Of course, now I need my... So instead of before, on this chart here, our initial shot was on the 2 chart when we defended at the top, right? We defended this position. We're looking at 2+1 because we're going to give him the +1 in both situations. So we're looking at 2+1. So we need a 4 is the magic number. It's not going to happen. You got 3 shots. One of them might be a 4 on average. But taking this wonky defense here, and we're going to go with, let's go with red. All of our shots are going to be in the 8 column. And they're all going to be +1 as well. They're all going to be 1. And if he should happen to stack someone, let's say he didn't come 2. So if we had, say, four squads here, we could actually, if we wanted to, do a 16 on 1. I personally wouldn't go a 16. It's not necessary on the +1 table. As you see, the difference between a 16 and an 8, not very much difference. Only 2 difference on the results table. I'm going to clear those out. 2 difference on the results table. It's far superior on an 8+1 to use 2 8 charts versus a 1 16 chart, especially if you gack the roll. Then you're just doomed. As you can see, you have multiple 8+1 shots that you can take on the enemy unit before he gets a shot first. You get to shoot first in this situation. Sure, if you set up in the buildings back here, same thing. You get to shoot first again. But the effectiveness of your fire is going to be extreme. And will you lose some of those units? Yes. So you're going from the 2 chart to the 8 chart. So you're going from a 4 to an 8 on the 8 you need to roll, or 4+1, or 7. So average roll is 7. So if you roll 7 on each of these rolls, +1 is going to yield what? God, I wish it would pop back and forth. 7+1 is going to yield, on average, a normal morale check, right? There's a 7 on the 8 chart here. You have to add 1, it's no morale check. And he has all 6s. So on average, he's going to fail all of his morale checks. You know, on average. And if he gets a 6, he's going to be pinned. So, and if he's pinned, heck, at that point, you may actually even want to jump in close combat if he's pinned. You have a possibility of ambush or what have you. But the point is this looks really dumb. This looks a really dumb setup. All the guys in the open, and I thought about it. It's like, it is kind of wonky. And then these units can do something else later. Let's say these units break and they route back. Now what have I done? What I've done is I slowed his assault. And so that's increased my defense. These guys are going to break and die regardless where you put them. If they're back here, they break and die. Guess what? He's pretty much closer. But if they break and die up here, let's say this guy's over here as well. All right. And let's say we have no effect on the Americans here. We 12s on all of our shots, 12s on all of them. And he breaks each and every one of them. So all these guys down here, prep fire. All these guys down here prep fire, right? And all these guys over here break. Right? Okay. Is that bad for the Germans? Yes or no?
It's one turn that the Americans won't be advancing on that side.
Okay, that's 1+, right? Obviously 1+. He can't move, and that's what he needs to do in this scenario is move. Excellent. Another thing, there's a couple things that we can look at here. What's the next thing that we can do? Even though we all break, we get no damage on him, right? We all break. It's like the worst case scenario. So, but there's some pluses. He fired. He can't move. Big point. Another one.
When you route, you'd route into the buildings, forming a second line.
Close, very close. Let's say they can't rally because 5 morale. How far are you going to route, Vinny?
Back to the buildings, but then again, there's no leader, so yeah, they'd struggle to rally.
Okay, and if this unit decides to route to F1 and then F0, what's going to occur in F1?
Interdiction.
Interdiction. Are these units going to survive interdiction?
Most likely not.
Okay.
Probably not. No.
All right. So what do we do then to let these units survive? Because
Low crawl.
low crawl, right? Low crawl is our only option for these guys because they're all going to die. The leader maybe can get away, but we're low crawling. And tell me what happens when we low crawl. And let's say nothing happens. They all stay DM'd. It's next turn's Americans phase. German turn comes and goes. Nothing changes on the map significantly that we need to worry about on this particular side. Next turn, American turn. Let's say in this case, let's say it's American turn 3. Right? Because America turn 1, he moved up. America turn 2, he prepped. Or let's say he advanced fired. Actually, let's say, yeah. He advanced fired, and let's just say, America turn 3 is this situation here. What can the American do at this point? Let's say, I think this scenario is 7 turns long. And that's another thing you have to understand is the length of the scenario and how that fits into what you need to do as a defender or an attacker for that case. So in this case, your entire line's gone. These guys aren't going to help them. The guys in the middle here are going to have the big boys here. You know, they're playing a different game. Essentially, at this point, it's 2 games at once. This guy's going to have 5 or 6 squads to deal with. They're not going to be able to help out this flank pretty much whatsoever. There might be an errant shot, but we're not going to go into that. What can the Americans do in the prep fire, starting the prep fire phase? Do the Americans want to prep fire again? There's no right or wrong answer here. This is just kind of something we're pulling up and seeing what happens if and when they do.
I wouldn't think they would need the fire because they're going to try to advance. As soon as they advance besides the unit, it's going to DM it again. Only problem is they're either going to have to go around or they're going to have to stop in front of the units.
Right. So what have we created here, Robert?
Just a line to slow them down for another turn. I mean, they can either advance 1 or they can try to go around the flanks.
Right. So what we've done, by virtue, we can't really route anyway, but even if you did want to route, but let's say he's time constrained, you may want to low crawl. Even if these were 8 morale units, you actually might want to low crawl, because if your leader's broken, he's the only one over there, you're probably not going to get these guys rallied anyway, and as soon as you go back to the buildings, he's just going to pursue and get you right where he wants to. Is you're leading him, essentially you're leading him into the bag of candy. He wants these buildings. Even if you're here, the only thing he can do is counter exhaust units, which helps you because that means if he's going to fire later on, he's going to have essentially a +1. So he can still run around them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and he could run around here, and they could do this sort of thing. This guy might be able to run around here and really screw you up. But if you essentially slowed him down 2 or 3 hexes, which is essentially, for all intents and purposes, a movement phase, right? So if these guys weren't there and they were in the buildings, all these guys were in the buildings instead. Man, it's kind of slow, eh? But so if they were in the buildings instead, let's get rid of these DMs here. And the Americans were still here, and you had a leader down here, right? He can still CX, right? But what does his CX get him in this case? If you were defending let's say your defense was back there, he can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He could actually start a flank on this side and start dealing with these guys. Not that he's going to make it there, but it's just theoretically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and this unit can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's see, it just goes up 6. And this leader, all he has to do is just kind of walk up here, so they can't route back down. So that has taken the 2 to 3 hexes away from the Americans' advance, which is let's say a 3/4 of a movement phase. So 2 hexes can be the difference between this building or this building in the back. So again, that's kind of understanding a scenario and what your setup areas are. You know, we've got the setup area on the blue line here. He sets up here. He's got 7 turns. You have to delay him. And we know the 666s versus the 436 in stone buildings, the 666s are going to win. That's an American victory versus your conscripts. To equalize that and to slow them down, again, even if you have no effective fire, that has slowed them down a little bit. You know, sure, you could take a guy back here. I'm not saying this is the best setup by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm just saying it's something that you could look at that could be like outside the box. You could have one guy here, so in case your whole line breaks, and then they can't do this end around route, because then he could then first fire, subsequent first fire at the next unit, that sort of thing. At least he'll lose something as well. That's perfectly fine. But again, my particular strategy, banking everyone up front and banking on the roll that I'm going to get some 7s. And if I get 2 7s out of that mess, and he has to roll morale checks, and he rolls 2 7s, essentially what I've done is eliminated half of his force for a turn and a half. Now, the Americans do rally fast. That is true. But these guys can't really do anything. If these guys shoot and break somebody, you know, this unit could, you know, let's see, this unit wasn't broken, right? I simply move him into this vacated location where this DM unit ran away from, and now I've essentially caused an eyesore for this guy. And that's kind of what you see in my replay of the scenario. You can exactly see how it kind of comes to fruition in that particular scenario, where I created a second flank where if my gamble was viable, and it seemed to be about half and half, you know, it was about like this, half my guys survived. Now what it did is it created, instead of being on the defense as a defending player, it allowed me to be sort of on the offense. If these units come up here, let's say he wants to be aggressive, and I manage to get behind him in LOS, right? What's going to happen there? Let's say these guys assault move in the open and they break for some reason. What's the problem going to be there for the Americans? And let's say specifically for SK, mind you, and this is the difference. Specifically for SK, there are 3 squads in this location. Let's get rid of these mediums. There are 3 squads in that location. What happens in this scenario when the Americans break at that location? And my unit's right here. In the route phase comes.
Yeah,
what happens in the route phase?
They're going to get
Go to
intercepted.
H3 or I4.
Okay, H3.
They'll
Can he
be
go to
getting close
H3? What's his route
Did they get
destination?
closer to an own enemy unit, right?
Right. So the route destination. Let's say he's got LOS over here, right? Well, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter whether the LOS to there. So let's go. Route destinations are H3 potential, right? So what we're looking at when we're routing. This location, and possibly that location. Well, these are in 2MF. This one's in 3MF, so we can just throw that one out the door. We can't go to H2. We can't go to J2. And because it's SK, we can't go to J3. You can't overstack. I don't believe you can be overstacked at any time. So, correct me if I'm wrong, SK players. The guys have been playing for a while. I don't think you can overstack at any time. There's no arrangements for the rules in that. So he can't go to J3 either. Can he go to I4?
No.
Okay, and H3 we said he couldn't go to either. So what happens to these units? Simply by having this scrub unit, even if he's CX'd, because we don't care, he's not going to interdict. He's just going to stop him from going back. What happens with that scrub unit that you could CX to get to this location by turn 2 or 3? He's caused all 3 of these units to be eliminated. They can't route back here. They can't go 2, 4, 6 back to a leader, or just 2 or 4 to safety. You've eliminated that route path as the defender by taking an aggressive stance. So use those tools. Again, the routing is very important. We covered that last time. That even though you could lose half your units here, you can still use whatever remnant you have and become a headache. Even if you just move him to G4. Even if you just move him to G4, and let's say he had his leader over here, and his other leaders were on the right side of the board. At least you eliminate one routing location, one routing destination. So, for all intents and purposes, what have you done? You're in this situation here. You're kind of taken off the left side of the board. You've put units in his face. You've taken off the left side of the board. The right side of the board's tough to deal with because it's open ground. The same reason why you're not there is it's open ground. And what you've done is you've funneled the American attack. Regardless of how many squads he has, he can only stick so much in that one area. Now, if he had that whole front to deal with, he could throw a couple smokes here and there and then make his advance along the entire front. The Germans don't have enough room, enough firepower to really cover the entire front. He can make it hard, but the Americans are coming through. You got a 9x2 flamethrowers again. You get some power, and that's what the Americans bring to the table. They don't bring morale; they bring firepower. So what you've done is you've funneled the Americans' attack by doing something wonky like this on the side. Now these guys may be eliminated. Even if once the Americans take this building, that entire let's just put these guys there. That entire side is gone. Now that entire side is just completely gone because you can just 666 and everyone dies. So punch him in the face. You could jump into the thing and turn your defensive posture into an offensive posture just to slow these guys up. If you slow these guys up 2 to 3 turns, these 4.36s has essentially 4 of them have essentially nullified 4 6.66s, which is a complete win in your situation. So, taking that into effect, let's switch over to the very first scenario, retaking Vierville. Let me pop that one open. So if you have the first scenario, retaking Vierville, here it is, boom. Because they don't put the victory conditions on these, at least on these cards for some reason. But, and this is where, when you specify what the victory conditions are, it's very, very important, even before you put the first counter on there, of what the victory conditions are. The same thing in the let me just put it right here in the middle. The same thing in simple equation. You need to know what each of you, do you need to do something, or does the enemy need to do something? And so if the enemy needs to do something in S3 simple equation, you need to know that, okay, if he needs to do this, then he'll need to break through my troops to get back behind me to take all those objectives. He doesn't care how many he kills of you. It doesn't matter. He just needs to take objectives. So victory kills, if you're one that wants to kill a lot of guys and you just got your giant stacks and you want to blast units, as the Americans, you can do that. But if you're not occupying buildings, you're losing. Now, in this particular instance, in the very first scenario, you see, obviously, in these highlighted hexes, I won't put the counters on. In these highlighted hexes, you guys are familiar with the setup. There's 3 full squads and a half squad. Whatever. I'll just go ahead and put them on there. That's what the venue's for. Come on, big boys. There's my 8-1 leader. Let's bring you over here. I think I can scroll. So we've got these guys here. And so again, I've gone over different things that you will look for in your setup in this particular thing. If you just throw them on here randomly, Don't throw your Americans on here randomly because you need to have a plan for them. Now, does anyone have the victory card, or does anyone know the victory conditions of this particular game before I go over it? We'll let someone chime in here.
The Americans win at game end if there are no good order German units in buildings N5, N6, M4, L3.
Correct. Correct. So, do the Germans need to control the buildings? In terms of squad leader definition. Do you need to keep... Oh, okay, let me put it this way. No good order units in those victory locations. Do you need to keep the Germans out of the buildings?
No.
Tony says no. Why, Tony?
Because you can have them broken. They can be broken and be in the building, and you'd still be okay. Or you could have them in melee.
Melee,
in the building.
yes, absolutely. And tell me the advantages the Americans have. Let's just say if 548s were there. This 548s come on, and you know, they wave their giant paratrooper machine guns around, and let's say you got that situation, right? Okay. American last turn, what can he do? Let's just say this was the situation here. What can the Americans do in the last turn and hopefully be successful at? If this were right at the game end, no other units exist, everyone else is dead or broken, they have no impact on the scenario, what can the Americans do with great success?
Advance in and survive.
Advance in, absolutely. Advance in and survive, and this guy can do whatever he wants to and survive. What are the chances of survival for close combat? We don't really need to kill him, right? Just like Tony said, if they're in melee, they're defined as not good order. So if they're not good order, we win. They can be there. They can be broken, just like you pointed out, and they can be in melee. Now, a 1-2 for the Germans. He's going to be at 1-2 on all these attacks. All right, that's the best we're going to give him is a 1-2. A 1-2, he needs to roll a 4 for a casualty reduction. Right, that means he's still in melee. That means he kills half our guys. He's still in melee. He needs to roll a 3 in each one of those hexes 3 times in a row to win the game. So, and this game is pretty short. It's 5 turns long, and that's what you'll see a lot. Now, obviously, if you can get into a position where you can keep the Germans from the buildings, makes your job easier. But your primary mission is to make sure there are no good order units in the buildings. Now, how does that differ? How does that situation differ? Okay, let's change the victory conditions to the Germans win if they control 2 of those buildings. How does that change the victory conditions on last turn with these units and nobody else is in effect? How does that change the outlook for the Americans? Simply by changing the rule to no good order, or the victory conditions to no good order, to have control of 2. I would say 2. Usually it's like 1. Have control of 2 of those buildings, 2 of the 4 of those buildings. And let's say L3, no one's actually running in there. So Germans don't control L3. How does that change the outlook for the Americans? Anyone?
You have to kill 2 of them now, right?
Right.
Look up control, but I think you got to kill 2 of the German squads.
Right. You have to eliminate the Germans from 2 of those locations. So the situation is exactly the same. The victory conditions, by virtue of no good order units in there versus control, is a huge difference. Let's look at it. What happened last time? The Germans needed to roll 3 3s in a row to win, or 1-3. You needed 1-3 to win in those situations because he needed 1 guy in those buildings. It's still going to be pretty hard to do, if you would agree with me. But the Americans advance again. Actually, this guy was a leader. Let's just say he's broken somewhere off the board. No leaders. Now, if there's no good order, oh, there's my leader. We go to close combat table. Now, we, as the Americans, have to win at least 2 of these. We're going to be at 1-1, other than the top guy, right? He'll be at 2-1. So he'll be at 2-1 -1. That's our best shot. Typically, you'd probably want to do something like this, but so he's at 2-1. You have to roll a 6 there, which is less than average. Here, you have to roll. That is a 5. That's not quite a 3-2, is it? We need 7.5 firepower to exert that. So we're still at 1-1 against the German. Right there, even with the -1, we need a 5 for a kill. And the guy on the bottom, we need a 4 for a kill. So in this case, the Germans needed 3 to win in the last situation. And the Americans, in this case, need 2 essentially 5s or 4s to win. So by virtue of just changing the wording in the victory conditions, changes exactly what you can look for at the end of the game and how you approach the game. At that point, if the Germans need control, you desperately need to keep them out of the buildings so you don't have to face this situation, which means you may need to put up a stiffer defense, you know, up in front. Most of the time the Americans do that anyway, but the difference being is, one, you need to prevent them from getting in the buildings, and the second one, you don't care if they're in there, even if you're not adjacent. If you just shoot and break him in your last phase, boom, no problem. This guy runs over here, no problem. This guy jumps in here, survives, no problem, because we're going to jump into close combat and survive, and therefore cause him not to be good order. So understand your victory conditions in each and every one of your scenarios. They may sound similar, but by virtue of changing just a couple words, no good order units, which means good order, usually it specifies no good order multi-man counters. Usually single man counters aren't included in any of that stuff, but you never know. Or control. So those two differences are very different. One thing that SK does use, which I'm not a big fan of, is the term occupy. As an SK player, I don't, or as SK ASL player, I don't understand what the term occupy means. It's just, it's vague. And being ASL or ASL SK, there's a lot of specifics in the game, and that's not very specific in terms of occupying. Is a broken unit consider occupying it? Is a single man counter broken in the building occupying the building? Does that satisfy it? The other two are well defined. Good order, control, well defined. Occupy is not quite defined as well, as at least from my point of view, for what I've read from the literatures. If you guys have a definition of that, that's fine. But just in terms of those other situations, it throws a bunch of haze in my view. So that's pretty much what I wanted to cover initially for you guys. Just when you're reading a scenario card, look at what you have to do as a scenario attacker defender, what they have to do to get the job done, and specifically the wording within the victory conditions, even if they're simple and short, that you may still, it will differ and change your point of view of what you need to get done and how you can defend that sort of situation. You don't want to have to jump in there and clear him out if he's got a control situation, but if he's got a good order situation, you can let him have those buildings if you can just occupy them later. So big difference, especially in a short-term scenario or short game like this one, in getting things done and looking to win the game. But that's about it. Any questions on the stuff that I've covered so far? Or maybe something you guys might want to go over besides this?
I had one question for Vassal. You changed this scenario?
I changed the scenario? Yes.
And when you changed on my display for Vassal, it's still on the old one? I
Oh,
could
okay.
see where you were making moves. What did I need to do to sit there and follow you?
Since I reloaded a game, since when you enter Vassal, that's a good question. That's the main. So when you enter the server, right? You went to the room, and then you simply enter the room. It automatically syncs to the room of whatever's in the room at that time. So what you do here is you've got when you click on and enter any one of the Valza rooms, like if I leave this room here and I click on defensive Luga, it will automatically sync up that room and load the map. If they change something else in the map, it doesn't keep syncing occasionally. It will change the time that it syncs. So if I change a map, what you either have to do is right click on me and hit synchronize. Sometimes it kind of doesn't work. What you could do is just simply go to the main room, enter some other room, and come back in, and it will automatically resync you. Like if I go to Mark right now, let's say Mark closed my window and loaded up another map, I could then sync with Mark. Let's say my map froze and Mark and I were playing a game, right? And my map froze and he's moving units. Then I could say, hold on, Mark, I don't know where you're moving to. And he'll say, hey, Stu, resync to me. Then I could right click on him. I could right click on Mark. And then, actually should highlight him. And then you could hit synchronize. And that will bring up what he has on his map. So, and that's
Cool.
the best way to do that. I would advise you, because sometimes that does happen every once in a while, is sometimes there was a while back, about a month or two ago, where there was a lot of desyncing from the server, and both of you would be kicked out, and you don't see any moves. What I would suggest to you, and in terms of learning as well, is when you start up a game, start your log file. Start a log file. Have it prompt you to start a log file, and what that does is it will keep track of each and every one of your moves, where the counters are, whether you do an LOS, stuff like that. If you should happen to type in the chat, like type yourself some notes, it will record that as well, and then you can addend them to one another to make one file once you're done with the game over, say, 5 or 6 sessions. So yeah, right click on someone and then synchronize with them, or pop out of the room and pop back in real quick in case you don't want to do all that right clicking stuff. So that's a good question there. Okay, that's a good question there. Okay. Any other questions in terms of stuff here, or other topics you guys might want to discuss?
I had a question that came up from the first scenario you were showing.
Okay.
So this kind of goes back to that we were discussing the Orchard Road last week.
Okay, let me look.
You had your German units like in, was it C2, D2, E2, F2?
Yeah, let me load it real quick.
Americans were in the woods.
Okay, guys in the room, go ahead and resync with me. Okay, the American units.
When you had the Americans, yeah, right here, the German units and I2, the American units here broke. If they route back like to E4,
Hold on one second.
would
Let me
that
get
be
set up.
considered like could they be interdicted there? Would that be considered open ground
Oh, I got you.
from I2?
From I2, it can be considered open ground. If what? There's one instance where that can be considered open ground.
I know if they're like using road rate.
Right. So if they enter, let's say this unit breaks here, right? If he goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, let's see the leader's back here, 5, right? Then he's using the road, essentially the road rate for that route, and therefore he's in open ground. So any German, oh my goodness, we're just gonna put the HMG there. Any German with range that has LOS doesn't leave the confine, right? Boom, it's straight down the road. This one leaves the confines, but it's open ground, so it doesn't really matter. So all those are open ground hexes to any units using the road movement rate or the open ground location in that hex. So therefore, if a broken unit were in F3, to avoid interdiction, if he wanted to go that direction, he would have to use the woods rate. He would have to pay for the woods. So he'd go 2, 4, 6, right? If those were orchards, he could still enter the orchards and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 by entering the orchards. And so he could route that way. Hold on, let me let my dog out because my wife agitated him. Yeah, that's a good question. And that's something you have to make sure of. But a broken unit could use the woods in that instance, instead of just having to go, okay, 2, 4, 6, or not 2, 4, 6 here, something like that. He probably won't get quite as far. But let's say he were here, and the leader were down in C7, well, or further. Let's say the leader, well, yeah, in C7 because he can't leave it. He might go 2 and then 3, 4 for whatever reason. Or let's say if it were the broken the other way. Let's say the Germans were here and firing down that way, firing up the board, and the Americans had a leader, let's say in G3, right? It's not the other scenario. I wish it would scroll to it. Let's say the Americans had a leader here, right? And he broke right here. So he wanted to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 back to him. Instead, he'd have to go 2, 4, and then he'd go 5 and 6 there. And so that way he can avoid the interdiction from these hexes, and then still make up the difference in the distance by getting a little bit closer to his rallying leader. So, but yeah, that's a good question. That's same thing we had the other one, where instead of orchard we have a woods. Same situation applies. The only difference between the orchard and the woods is that once you leave the confines of the road of an orchard, it then becomes the open ground location, like on this here. If these are all orchards, and we're firing from I2 to B5, this is pretty close here. It doesn't look like it does leave the confines, but that looks pretty close. If it did leave the confines there, if the little greenery went into the divot here, then it would be just like we discussed earlier, and that would be an orchard location and therefore hinder the fire. So, yeah. Slight difference. Again, that's why you got to track LOS, and you got to know kind of what you're looking at in those sort of situations. So, it can make a difference. It may seem like open ground, like we thought that one hex was open ground, and we say, oh, wait a minute, it actually isn't. And so it changes the situation by that little sliver in that location of that inherent terrain makes the difference between you getting shot to hell or you having a possibility of surviving an easier attack. So, anything else like maybe about scenario cards or stuff like that, or setups, or again, I just want to kind of throw that in there to because I mentioned before is you really want to read the scenario card a couple times in terms of reading the victory conditions. Just first thing I look at a scenario is the victory conditions, and then I look at, okay, I'm playing the Germans. What do I have as the Germans? Oh, that looks kind of meh, And then I look at the opposing force. Oh my gosh, he's got a ton of guys. And then you've got to set out your map, look at your map, find out where your setup areas are, find out whether he enters the board, find out whether he sets up behind you, whatever. Get a picture of the situation, and then after you have a better picture, go back to the victory conditions and say, oh, it's not that bad. I've only got 2 squads against his 10, but he's got 5 turns to go 2 board lengths, and he's got to go uphill. Not that bad, So that way you can visualize the scenario better before you actually start it. Obviously, we kind of do that as we go along, but sometimes you lose track of what the victory conditions are. Even veteran players of many years, you'll see them play a game, and just like in the S case and the SK1 is I did an example of that, a video on that, and I actually got one of the victory hexes in the wrong place. The example was pretty much the same, but I got the victory condition in the wrong place. If I had played that scenario thinking I needed to defend that victory hex the entire game, and he moves into the actual victory hex, which I just dismissed, especially if you're playing face to face, because you don't have the cheater, set up lines and V for victory hexes as you do in Vassal, which makes Vassal a great interface, by the way. Then you can just lose a situation like that, because if the guy just wants to win, he might say, by the way, because like say he were a victory hex and you didn't attack him for like 3 turns in a row. It's like, by the way, this is, I am where I need to be, right? I mean, this is, because he might be confused about why you're not attacking him, and say, well, that I'm in the victory hex, right? And you haven't shot me for 3 turns, and he might, oh shit, if it's a buddy you played for 20 years, the tournament you probably won't do that because you obviously want to advance, or you might, it depends. But it just goes to show you that even though you've played 400 games, 1,000 games, 1,500 games, you may have the opportunity to misread a victory condition or a victory condition location. So it's always good to really break it down, look at what you need to do, and set your plan. Your plan never works, by the way. Your plan never works. So get the plan right, as long as you have knowing what he needs to do all the time, every turn. Okay, he's got 10 hexes this turn. He needs 15 more hexes. How many hexes will that be? Look at the scenario. If he needs 25, but so in this sort of situation, he needs 25 locations. So what you need to do is, okay, if I'm the Americans and if I break through on the right side, count out where you can be to get the 25 locations. Right? So there's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. He's got like 15 to 17 here. He only needs 10 more. Well, there's a group over here and a couple here. Does he actually really need to come on this side? No, he really doesn't. This is bonus for him. If he's pushing hard here, he only needs to pursue these locations here and ignore this. If he could delay you, if he could distract you to sending more units over here, then he can still survive over here. So can he get across this road? That's one thing he has to cross. If you set up forces in Z5 that have better range than that, you can cover the road, but what does the Americans have to get across the road? He's got tons of smoke, right? You got a couple of units here. Each one, on average, he's going to get 1 smoke across the road, so any forces over on this side can easily get across. So one of these locations is likely going to be smoked, and then at that point he can go back here by counter exhausting and start essentially mopping up buildings in the back. And then you do not want to be on the offensive in this one in terms of retaking buildings as the Germans. You want to prevent. Once he gets in these buildings, if he's got something like this, you're not doing anything to him. You're just not. You get close, even if you get to a stone building that's 12 plus 3, that's a 6 for a 7 for a pin check, and you're going to fail that every single time. So again, knowing what the Americans could do in this case, drop tons of smoke. Now, what can you do if the Americans were here? If the Americans were here and you need to get across, well, you can't drop any smoke, and so now the tables essentially have turned, because the Americans have great range down to blow you away. You just have to, take 6-2 shots. Again, that's how you analyze. The Americans can cross roads easily. You, as the Germans, have no chance of crossing the road with impunity, because your 447s, they don't have smoke making capabilities either. So you die when you cross the road. The Americans can cross the road pretty much easily. So you want to really stop them in this sort of situation. But this is an interesting scenario, by the way. You can play it any number of ways. But anyway, just say, read your scenario card and don't just read it at face value. Just kind of read it through once to take a gander at it, set it up, then go over it again. Look at the victory conditions. Okay, my forces here in this situation. Okay, what do I need to do, and what does he need to do? And then, especially if you're looking from his perspective. If you're looking from his perspective, you know what you would do, and try that. And so essentially you want to stop what you would think that either you would do or he would do if you know your opponent. So, and that will help you a lot in terms of focusing on what the victory conditions allow, and focusing on how your units can get you to that victory end at the end of the game. So, as we showed in the other scenario, retaking Fearville, depending on the victory conditions, with the exact same situation, changes it from essentially a German advantage to an American advantage by just to change from good order to control. It changes the entire game, and sometimes that subtlety can be missed and forgotten, even by experienced ASL players. So you're not the only ones in the boat. Even if you're brand new to the game and just bought one today and you haven't even unwrapped it from the shrink wrap. So everyone will make those mistakes. So, any other questions, gentlemen? Comments? Descriptions?
I guess a comment, Stuart, is
Okay.
you know, when you're thinking about setups too, is think about when your defense how you're going to move laterally, right? Because a lot of times if you're spread out initially, you could get, you know, a focused attack and think about how am I going to reinforce and then flip that around from the attacker's side to how am I going to prevent that, right? How can I, if I'm going to set up an attack, how do I prevent the defense from, if I attack on the left, from reinforcing the left with the right, you know?
Absolutely.
How do I split him up, segment, divide and conquer kind of thing?
Absolutely. Just as, you know, a lot of times, a lot of people say stacking is terrible in ASL. It depends on what you want to have accomplished. If the Germans stack heavily in the front, and the Americans have his units on the side over here, right? Let's say the Germans stop the advance over here, and the Americans have just floundered. But he's got. God, I hate that it reset. Where's my HMG? Here, that's just these LMGs over here. I'm used to playing another game where the map will actually scroll to the left, and this one doesn't. Let's say all your HMGs are, or your LMGs on this side for whatever reason. Okay. And these guys have 4 hex range, so he's only got a range to here. So 2 minus 2, no big deal. You know, one of these Americans. Let me clone some of these. Some of these Americans are here, and they've got the Germans on the run, and your forces are set up like this, and you know the Americans are really gonna just hammer out over there, and just like Tony said, that you need to be able to play. You don't want these guys necessarily too far, like let's say defending over here, or maybe defending over here, which is viable, right? Because you're covering a wide open ground area. And that's fine. You want to make yourself your defense to be fluid in terms of, okay, I've contained him over here, but that flank is gone. That flank is, if I can't get anything over there, I'm just lost. And let's say if these units were more strengthened over here, that's essentially what we're looking at. If this is all you have, and he's jumbled all of his, if you anticipated him moving through the town, and you put tons of guys over here, assuming there are guys under there. Oh, there's my HMG, duh. Let's see, the HMG's over here, because, you know, the last 5 times you played, the Americans came this way. Let's say, well, the hell with that. If the Americans, I'm not gonna go in that meat grinder. Shove everything over here, and then go for that. So, can the HMG get there? He might, but, you know, if he's got this right here, that HMG's not gonna get over there safely. You know, this unit, you know, these guys can pretty much safely go to these stone buildings for the most part, right? Stone buildings are great. This guy can, that's not a safe location, right? W1, right? This J3 unit has LOS to W1. Does everyone see that LOS?
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty close, pretty clean. All right? Again, geometry of ASL. That, to me, you know, to regulars, the building's in the way. I'm just going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then advance your next turn. Well, guess what? You're probably going to take a medium machine gun, you know, because he could probably fire the medium machine gun, hope to get right, and then he could fire some of these other guys. You know, maybe he anticipates him moving over. Or just maybe he fires the whole ball of wax. So what? You know, 6-2, this guy's gone. And he's going to be out of it, not helping your flank. These guys have achieved a good position because you have a more fluid defense. And when these guys come across, you know, you have potentially 4 different shots from these units that can do some damage to these 5 or 6 Americans crossing the open ground over here. So having a defense that you can adjust to, know where you want to go when things go wrong. If these guys break here, these guys have to have enough movement factors to get into a position, whether you go 1, 2, 3, don't see X, and then just advance here to cover, say, the woods, or if you have a leader 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you know, if he advances over here, he's a little bit further away. So if this HMG were here with a leader, then you could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then you could advance here, essentially covering this road, essentially covering this avenue here, where the Americans are going to be running and going to that side of the map there. From this position way over here, he can get to such a position where he's helping out right there. And that's kind of what you want to look at is when you're setting up is, okay, he's not going to be there the whole game. Where can he go in one turn to give me another advantage? Just like Tony pointed out, you need to have some of your guys available so you can go to a spot to really put the squeeze on your enemy. It's like, oh, you know, he might think that it's open, right? This HMG over here, you know, as the American player, it's like, oh, okay, next turn, you know, I advanced in my locations here. Next turn, I'm going up that road because, you know, whatever, I could drop some smoke and get one or two guys across. But once I reach H0, I'm free and clear. Well, the Germans, because it's not over here, it's in a better spot over here. You can get to that location and then put the hurt on him once he starts moving up here. You know, I think he's got LOS to AA1 as well. He might have LOS straight down that side because that doesn't hit that building. So that HMG, once he moves to that location, if you know that LOS exists, which you do now, he covers pretty much that whole flank. And with that rate of fire 3, this is the linchpin in any defense or attack for that matter. He covers that whole side of the board by one move. He goes from one side to the other, one movement phase. Now the American has to deal with that HMG, probably with a -1 leader too as well. So you're ignoring this orchard for all intents and purposes. But a 7 on the 6 chart, morale check, 6 morale, you know, likely you're going to fail it. Well, you're going to fail it with your 7 roll. So, and that's all you need to do. Slow the Americans down. And guess what? Well, if you fired on them, you got rate of fire. There's your 7 with rate of fire. Now you get to break another unit after that. So, and not only moving some units, but moving the right units. You know, let's say both of these units were here, right? And both of those units were in this location. You probably want to move the 4 through 6 to this location, the 4, 4, 7 here. Why would I want to move the 4 through 6 here versus this location? What's the difference in terms for the Germans? Anyone? Is that the exact? Does that give me the same defense as this? It's kind of lagging a little bit. Does that give me the same defense as this? No, it doesn't. Why not? Because this unit here has a 3-hex range. He could only shoot out the 6 axes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He could shoot here. This unit could shoot to 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Right? And the machine guns are exactly the same. Swapping it out, if I did, because my computer lagged a little bit. No, I didn't, of course. Swapping it out gives the 436 that extra inch of range. Even though you're removing it from this unit, you know, theoretically this unit's covering that side anyway. It gives this unit a 2 firepower shot out to here versus say to like right here to that location. So, and that in and of itself can make a difference, you know.
Hey, Stuart, I got a question for you on range.
Okay.
When you're firing subsequent first fire, say in this case your light machine gun and your squad in I2 have both fired and they have a first fire marker on both of them, and you want a subsequent first fire, are you limited by the range of the squad in this case, or because you're only allowed to fire within normal range if I understand the rules correctly? Can you consider the range of those two units independently? In other words, can I fire the machine gun 8 hexes out, or is he limited by the range of the squad
You can sustain fire the LMG to its range.
to its range?
Like
Okay.
if you had the HMG and they both first fire, if the HMG wanted a subsequent first fire, it has a 16. It's not 3 hexes whatsoever. Only this unit's subject to 3 hexes. So that will be then final fired, right? On that particular thing there. And also, you're also limited, not necessarily, even though it could go to a potential of 16, because you first fired, you have to take into consideration other units that are close to you. Let's say you shot this guy here and broke him, right? And you left residual. Let's say it was 4. All right. And then this unit here, for whatever reason, he goes here. He moves to E2. What's lagging by? E2 and then F1, right? Can you subsequent first fire on that unit, given the situation?
Well, do we count the mini machine gun down here in J3?
Yeah,
no?
you have to count this guy here.
Yeah, then no.
So then this guy, even though it's within range of the squad's subsequent first fire and the machine guns, cannot fire on this unit because this guy's closer. Now, if he were 3 hexes away, oh come on. Now, if he were 3 hexes away, or out of line of sight, right? Then you're fine. If he's out of line of sight, you're fine. If he's 3 hexes away, then these guys are equivalent, therefore he's the closest unit. And you can then subsequent first fire on this unit. And then if this guy over here moves 3 hexes, because you broke him, assuming you have ready to fire with the machine gun, well, let's assume you have ready to fire with the machine gun, then you can, well, we're talking about subsequent first fire, then yeah. He's only get 1 shot. You only get 1 shot in subsequent first fire. But you have to take into consideration not necessarily just the units you fired at, but anybody else who's closer. And it could be, you know, he could have a half squad. That's why the half squad's important. Is even if you have a half squad, you can just move a half squad up in here, thinking that you're not going to fire at him. Let's see, he took casual reduction. And then you first fire at somebody else like this guy. All these other guys can essentially run through G2, G1 with impunity. This guy can't fire at anybody else because this guy, this 346 here, is right next to him. These guys can move freely. And again, that kind of goes back to what Tony was saying, is keeping your defense fluid. Make sure that you have somebody, maybe a different guy on the flank, right? Let's say he was here, and you know he's going to move here to get, let's say he's going to CX. And so why would he CX? Well, first of all, he's probably not going to charge this unit, right? He's probably going to CX to get into J2, or at least K2 by all means, but J1. So if he's got his assault force ready to move, you know, you've got to take that into consideration. At that point, even though it may not seem obvious, you may want to fire this unit, even though you don't really want to. But you may want to fire this guy to break this guy to keep him at that 3 hex range, so he can't do our little fancy dancy maneuver over here. Also, what that does is at least 2 visual for the next Joker that wants to do the same thing. Let's see, he had a squad in there as well, right? And again, remember to place your residual firepower. In my replay analysis of S6, any residual firepower, in this case, like two firepower, 4 firepower residual. That's a medium machine gun with infinite rate of fire. This does not cower, and it will continue to fire as long as units move in there. So that just like our broken wall over here sets up that defensive perimeter. Remember how I circled all those broken units? Again, jumping back onto Tony's idea of being a fluid defense. If we had that wall of broken units right here, right, and he can't go through them. God, man, my computer's lagging. Got 1,000 things, and he can't go through them. But yet, yeah, it's going pretty slow. But yet we have this unit here, and we know all these guys get nailed. And if he goes here, right, and then goes to G1, if we first fire on him there, let's say nothing happens to him. You know, a worst case scenario, nothing happens to him. One guy gets through, you know, which may cause a lot of problems, still a lot of problems for us. But the next guy is not going to be doing this freebie move here and getting these locations. You know, he's going to think twice about going to 2 firepower over there. He might decide to go the long way. And again, if you had somebody over here, you could lay residual firepower to cut off that particular path. Even though it may not be your optimal shot, if you know that's an avenue of approach, if he's funneled into that location because you know he's going to do that, you know, even a 1 residual is enough because he's going to be taking a 1-2, which is a 7 as a pin task check on that. So, and again, 6 morale because you're dealing with knowing your opponent. If they had 8 morale units, would you want to do that? Maybe not. You might want to look at a juicier target because 8 morale unit can probably go through a 1 firepower residual pretty easily. You know, he could take a pin task check pretty easily, even a 2-2. A 7 will still, I think, 7 will still pass, and 8 will pin him on the normal morale check that you're going to roll. So, because simply by virtue of having a low morale, a little residual firepower goes a long way. The lower morale your enemy has, the smaller residual firepower has a stronger impact on him. So, but yeah, that's a very important point that Tony's making. Is make sure that you can adjust however stretch the imagination, whether you adjust 1 hex or just a full movement phase with a leader. Know that you can adjust and know where he needs to go to cover that situation, so you guys can, you know, have a better chance of survival, have a better chance of success. So, but that's a good points on that one. Good points on that one, Tony. Yeah, the next level of subtleties above the game. Well, do you guys have any other questions? I had a couple things kind of pop open, obviously, during the interim. And then we could probably end the session now. I would have liked to have done a replay, but that will come at a later date, of course, which would be great. And that will allow you guys to ask questions during the middle of the game, and we can learn that way. You know, hey, why did you go here? Why did you why did you set way far up in the front to do? This is my plan. This is what I'm going for. Let's see what happens. And you can actually see what happens during the game. So if you guys have any other questions, we can end it here. But other than that, I'll open it to you guys. Nope. Tony, nothing?
No, hey, nothing. No, thank you,
Okay.
Stuart. I really appreciate it. This is good stuff.
Yeah. Again, watching a live game will bring everything into the situation and might bring up some other questions. I always have questions when I watch another game, and that just by simply changing 1 or 2 words in the victory conditions changes exactly what you have to face in that sort of situation. If you want to see the game, if you guys haven't seen it already, and it's just in the first couple turns, you see what this setup for my 4.36s can do for you beginning SK players or people that are interested in watching it. I hadn't thought of that setup initially, but then I looked at it, and after I put it up there and said, this is really kind of wonky, but hey, it kind of works, you know, and take a look at that. Like I say, just hit a double speed or whatever like that, and see how effective It could be, obviously, the dice rolls being what they are, but you'll see the number of shots I get off and what I try to do to the enemy, just in terms of that wonkiness. And you don't have to watch the whole video, but again, you'll see what my description was actually put into action, and you can have questions from that, maybe for the next session or something like that. But it's pretty interesting, obviously I played against a newer player, but he still did have a sizable force over there, and he had his flamethrower too as well, which is good and bad for both of us, and you'll see how kind of like that works out. But thanks for showing up, guys. Appreciate the outcome here. I'm just trying to do it to help you guys clarify things, or maybe think of things that you may not have thought of. I obviously can't cover everything that you might have in mind, but between your playings between now and next time, if you have weird situations that may come up, or that's what I'll do. I'll challenge you guys. If you're playing a game, if you have an example in a game, especially like if you log it on Vassal, log that sucker on Vassal. And what we can do is when you guys could come in next time, if you want to participate, then you can bring that sort of situation, and you can actually step by step go through your log file and say, okay, we got to this point, and then this wonky thing happened, and questions can arise from there. And we could sync to you, and then go over what your exact situation was instead of having to think of something in mind, and get that down. And for those that don't know how to log, when you pop your file, right? You pop your file, it's simply begin log file right here. When you load your game, begin log file. I have mine queued up in the preferences to ask to start logging before a replay. I have it set up right here, the second or third box. And so begin log file, you just name your log. It says, like in this sort of situation, simple equation vlog. Name it, save it where you want to as normal, and then it will keep track of every single move and every single roll. And that way, you can move by move, shot by shot, replicate the game for us to go over it, and we can all add our input to you and say, yeah, he got that -2 shot, or he got that hindrance through the orchard because of this, or instead of routing that direction, you could have routed this direction. And one of those kind of routing situations that we went over last time, I think Robert was here before. Mark D may have been here as well. I'm not sure. There's a lot of Marks. Man, Mark's a popular name. But there actually came in that very specific scenario where his shortest destination was to an enemy that was out of his LOS, but he had to move that way, and depending on where he moved, whether he moved up or to the right, determined whether he was screwed or not screwed. If he went this way, the enemy was in LOS, and then he'd have to stop. But because he went up, like we described last time in the routing, he could then, because he's in a better position, route away. So both hexes were legal to route to. One gave him a better opportunity to survive, and that's exactly what the player did in that situation. So those situations during that one half player turn that I watched actually came up in a game, and you'll see that quite often, to be honest with you. You might want to route to a guy in LOS in a wonky way and say, oh, I can see him now, I can't get closer, now I can route completely like in the opposite direction. It's really strange, and your opponent will say, huh, I kind of got screwed because you didn't really want to go where I wanted you to go. So that's kind of vague. We'll have to bring up some things. Again, bring your games, throw it in the middle of a log file, save it at that specific point or whatever, or you can step through it, it goes quickly, and we can go over those specific situations. We can go over your specific route situations of how to go, where to go. And that's every game is routing. Every game is routing. Very important. If you have any questions like that, there's plenty of guys on this SK Skills one, SK Central Forum, Facebook. Any questions? No question's a dumb question, because everyone's at different levels. Everyone's at different levels, and we're just all on a different rung of the ladder, and you know, ask the guy in the rung above you, you know, about something that may clarify something for you. Actually, by your asking him that, that may be something that he needs clarified, because, you know, just because you might be a rung above the guy, it doesn't mean he knows everything. I mean, even me, I don't know everything, and I've gotten a couple things wrong. Hopefully, not getting a couple things wrong. We're just going to keep on the simpler level, but there's always situations, and sometimes when you ask somebody a question, it allows them to reflect upon the answer and think about it, and then sometimes you could actually teach the person that you're asking the question to. So it works both ways. So lots of resources available to you guys. Please use them. You are not alone if you're playing solo, and if you have questions, you're not alone. Just throw it out there. You don't even have to say, hey, I'm a solo player. Just say, hey, this came up in my game. The other day, and I didn't know what to do, or my opponent couldn't, you know, if you, you know, I don't want anyone to feel embarrassed they're playing solo. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just the nature of being a war gamer. Not a lot of guys of us around. But if that bothers you, just, you know, don't even mention. Just say, hey, you know, this came up into our game, and what do we do? And that way you don't get some people that could be judgmental to be judgmental. We could just ignore that garbage. So anyway, thanks a lot, guys, and we'll see you next time. Again, thanks for showing up. Appreciate it. Hope you guys had fun. Hope you guys learned something, or maybe clarified something, or hey, that's something new I saw. That's the whole point, is to get you more comfortable with SK and the ASL system, and that way you'll have one less, you know, thing to think about during the game. But victory conditions and how to approach them and win is definitely, I mean, that's pretty much number one, right, guys? So we'll catch you later, and have a great evening. Thanks.
All right. Thanks,
Steve.
Stuart.
Thanks.